being ambassadorial is a very legalistic kind of thing. It's a very transactional kind of thing. You are saying things in a certain way to get a certain response from the spirit.
Whereas if you do that with your family, you're a terrible person.
Yeah, I couldn't suggest using that with your family.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are so excited to welcome back to the podcast magicians, artists, teachers, and Solomonic power couple, Aaron and Carrie Leitch. So, what does it actually take to maintain a magical property deep in the green of Florida? What does sigil actually mean in the grimoires? Why is ancestral practice so important? Well, Aaron and Carrie Leitch are the best people to ask. Both Carrie and Aaron have been on the podcast separately before and together, so I definitely encourage you listeners to check out those past episodes. Also, just a quick background for the few listeners who don't know about Aaron and Carrie. So Aaron wrote one of the first books that many in the magical and Solomonic communities consider a foundational introduction to the practice and theory behind grimoire magic. It's called Secrets of the Magical Grimoires. And also, Aaron is a member of the Golden Dawn, and Carrie has studied several esoteric traditions for more than 25 years. She has training in traditional Golden Dawn and Rosicrucian symbolism and tarot interpretation, among many other interests. And more than 4 years ago, both Aaron and Carrie co-founded Doc Solomon's Occult Curios, where people can procure materia magica and Solomonic items from many of the most well-known grimoires, properly consecrated and prepared. We have so many magical and esoteric topics that Aaron and Carrie share about in this episode, and we're so thankful for their time. Also, a huge thank you to each and every supporter of the podcast on Patreon for keeping the podcast running and for your excellent questions for Carrie and Aaron. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, let's welcome back Carrie and Aaron Leitch. Carrie and Aaron Leitch, thank you both just so much for taking the time and coming back on the podcast today.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
It's awesome to be back.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been way too long.
Definitely been a while. And I know many listeners are very familiar with your amazing magical property, Solomon Springs in Florida. And I understand this might be a great place to open that you just got a new mower, and I'd love to talk about this. Why on Solomon Springs is having a new mower so excellent and needed?
Why we were celebrating?
Well, several reasons. One of which being,
first of all, we're getting old.
Well, yeah, there's that.
I mean, we literally had a conversation about a week ago about how excited we were over this new toilet cleaner that it cleans so much more. See, here we go. So, yes, we're old, and these things excite us and get off my lawn. And then
except twice a year.
Except twice a year. and then go ahead with we've been taking care of around the house, and around the house is, I guess, a little bit more than an acre. The very long driveways, the barn area up there. It's a lot, but with a string trimmer mower pushing it. And when it was time for festivals and stuff, hire the neighbors to bush hog it and do all the trimming and stuff. Yeah, it's the same guys that farm because we're only caring for 20 acres. The other 20 acres is a hay field. They rent the land from us and just maintain. The cows have access to both sides when there's no festivals, of course. Then they harvest the hay. So at least that we don't have to mow.
Yeah.
But over, around our house, and of course the park area, which is where the campers are going to be, and all the festival, the magic circles down there. They're going to be erecting a permanent sweat lodge this year. So that will be there every festival. We're finding it's a lot of work. It's even more work than city slickers like us knew it was going to be to maintain land like this.
So heavy equipment was going to be necessary.
Yeah. I mean, there's heavier equipment, but I think this will do fine for the space that we have. And then with the other power tools that we're going to be getting in a few days, we should do all right. It's, I guess, about 13 acres we got to mow and keep up and stuff whenever the water levels this way. But it's awesome.
So, during the pandemic with all the lockdowns, there wasn't much of an impetus for any of this. The festivals definitely weren't happening. And I'm not saying it never got taken care of, because it did have to get bush hogged several times. But what we want to do is actually maintain it rather than just going out there and clearing out everything twice a year for the festival. Keep it nice year round. And, who knows? There might be other folks that want to rent the land for, camping or drum circles or, whatever they've got going. So it's a lot of work. And we're slowly getting over our city-fightedness.
So you just don't like to go outside. I don't mind it.
And I hate going outside.
And up until now, I've done pretty much all the...
Because the sun gets on me, and I don't like that.
Well, Aaron, as someone who's half Irish, I can certainly sympathy with you.
I'm Celt too.
But you're not a ginger. She's a bloody Campbell. I'm from the clan Macbeth, and if we walk by a window, we turn into a shriveled crisp. So,
well, you saw my mom.
But now we've got this mean machine. We were going to get a 0 turn, but this actually had a wider base and more horsepower. So we just went with that. It was more, but we're wanting this to last as long as it can because it's got a big job to do. Now I'm excited to go do yard work. I love riding around.
He was mad today because it was going to rain and he couldn't go.
Oh man, I'm so mad. Every day I want to go out there and ride that thing, but it rains, or we have to go to temple, or we got to go to a doctor's appointment, and I can't play with my toys, so I'm throwing a temper tantrum.
When you're mowing, when you're doing the work of maintaining the land, obviously you both are always incredibly aware of, the spirits and the proper ways to do things. But when you're mowing, is there a spiritual contact there? Or are you just like, okay, I got to get these 13 acres mowed and get through it,
Honestly, it's kind of both. It's kind of both because, in this Florida heat and humidity, nobody wants to go mow. But I used to take walks every day and stuff.
Basically, outside is a sweat lodge.
Right. But now putting the work into the land, my own land, kind of the ancestral connection there, because it's the same land that my ancestors have been on for 150, 60 years. There's definitely that meditative aspect of it too, and putting in the work. And it's like, it's another offering to the spirits.
So on the one hand, it's a repetitive, mesmerizing kind of thing to do anyway. If you are so inclined, you'll kind of zone out and make those connections anyway. On the other hand, like she said, you're maintaining the land and your genus loci and your ancestral spirits. If you're lucky enough to live on ancestral land like we do, they love that stuff. The old Egyptian story, there was a boy leaning against the Sphinx, and he was actually leaning against the Sphinx's head because the Sphinx had been buried all the way up to its neck in sand. And I think it was Horus. Yeah, Horus. Yeah, because the Sphinx belongs to Horus. And Horus appeared to him in a dream while he was napping there and said, if you will excavate the sand from around my monument here and get it back into good condition, I think he said, I'll make you king. I hope I'm not mixing up my ancient Egyptian stories here, but he did promise a great reward and delivered on it. I think he went on to become like a king of Pharaoh or something, but all just because he restored his monument, so they love it when you maintain the things that they've left behind for us.
We do have some listener questions for you about ancestral practices, and we have a listener question for you to that point from Lucid Themes for both of you. And Lucid is saying, Aaron and Carrie, in your ancestral practices, have you ever met mystics or magicians or sorcerers from your own ancestry, and were they able to teach you anything?
Not necessarily magicians. I have a suspicion that some of my Southern ancestors may have at least superficially been interested in, or somehow, I don't want to say practice, it's a little too, but at least had some kind of superficial interest in I get the two of them confused. Spiritism or spiritualism?
I don't know.
The Kardecian
The Kardecian one.
Other than that,
I want to say that's spiritualism.
Not really. Not really as far as that goes. Although I, have obviously talked to my ancestors and they have taught me things.
I know context means a lot, and I get the sense from that question. Well, okay, even almost any time that question is asked, they're usually asking, is there some ancient wizard from Babylon that is your ancestor and that you've contacted? And
no.
The thing is with the ancestor work, you're going to mainly make connections with the ancestors closest to you. The others are there, but the further back in time, the more backdrop they are to the whole thing. And of course, it's especially going to be the ones you knew and loved in life and they passed. And then it will be others that are closer to you. So it is very unlikely that like someone like Carrie or even me are going to find wizards and sorcerers real close to us in our lineage. We're the black sheep that went that way. Not really. Our grandparents were not doing this, Even our great-great-great-grandparents weren't. But what your question also makes me think of is your uncle's, wasn't his name Solomon? He was a judge?
One of my uncles or cousins, but he was a Supreme Court judge in Georgia, state Supreme Court. He was for a long time. He had a very interesting history. Spent some time behind the Iron Curtain when he was in the military, all kinds of interesting stuff. And one of my very close friends, and this was, 7-8 years ago, I guess. She happened to run across, she was in Savannah, and she happened to run across his grave.
Totally
the
by
big
chance.
Cemetery there. And she saw the name, and of course, the way Michael is spelled, my maiden name, is a little unusual. She sent me a picture of it, texted me a picture, and she's like, "Is this one of yours?" And I'm like, "Very likely." Being spelled that way and being in Georgia. And I went and did the research, and yeah, sure enough, I can't remember, I'd have to look at it again, but he's like cousin, uncle, something like that.
But what that means for us is that whenever
he has done some work for me.
Yeah, whenever we have any issue that involves legal, you will connect to these different ancestors that have different skill sets. If not ancestors, judges, lawyers, general contractors, sorts of things.
Yeah. And I have ancestors across a lot of different things.
Police
I've learned
officers,
to work like that.
Doctors.
So,
and all these spirits can be called on to bring the expertise they had in life to help your issues. So
absolutely.
So in our case, have we run into any actual magicians? No. But if there were magicians within 2 or 3 generations of us, we would have,
Yeah. And one thing I do want to, not blood ancestors, but like spiritual ancestors.
Oh, that's a whole different ball of wax. Then you're getting into the biblical forefathers and.
Well, I'm just talking about some of our fathers that have. That have passed and stuff.
Of course, through the order, we've got all sorts of brothers and sisters who have passed, so they're on the other side, and we do communicate with them from time to time. As one of our initiations say, I take my place as the newest forged link in the chain of adepts. Your lineage, your magical ancestors. It goes back from us to Chick Cicero, to Israel Regardi, to who was it that initiated him? Because he went into the Stella Matutina. So, Yeats and his crowd, and then from them to Mathers and on and on and on back through time. Those are all ancestors of a sort.
Yeah.
And those, we definitely call on those guys.
We have a listener question for you both. From Alex S., who says, "Hi, Aaron and Carrie.
Hi, Alex.
What is your opinion on self-initiation into the Golden Dawn, the book and the concept?" And Alex is saying, what would you suggest for those who would like to get involved in the Golden Dawn, but don't have access to a nearby temple? And is it as efficacious?
I'll start with the book. Self-initiation of the Golden Dawn tradition. What's very unique about the Golden Dawn, if you compare it to something like Masonry, for Masonry, you go through these lodge initiations, and these initiations make you a brother. In fact, you go through the Blue Lodge and you become a free and accepted Mason, a Freemason. And then you can go and join other orders. Those initiations don't have a lot of application, practical application. I mean, there's a lot of philosophy and lessons in there, but practical application, those initiations don't really have any use beyond, okay, now you've gone through the same ritual that the rest of us have gone through. It makes you a brother. Now you're on the inside and we can share our secrets. Okay. Because that's one function of initiation. But the other function of initiation is the spiritual part. That is present in the Masonic initiations 100%. But what made the Golden Dawn unique, because it was founded by Masonic magicians, essentially, is that those rituals are based on very sound magical principles. And they have application outside of just being used for those initiations. So that's why there's the Golden Dawn had such a massive impact on the entirety of the Western occult tradition, because those rituals were not just applicable inside the order. Because, like if a Mason uses a handshake, the handshake may have a symbolic meaning. A lot of Masons sadly don't know the symbolic meanings, but it's there. It or at least originally had one. But in the Golden Dawn, if you use a handshake or a posture, what they call the grade signs, for example, those are actually magical postures that are used to project energy or to do different things. So again, they can be used, even though you're not in the order, you can still use those magical postures in your rituals for good effect. So there is no need to be initiated into a temple in order to use that system. That system is sound and you can use it outside of it. Again, that is why so many other magical systems in the West adopted it in one form or another and based their systems on it. So what a book like Self-Initiation in the Golden Dawn gives you is all of that, the practical stuff that even though you're not a member of the order, because going through those rituals in that book will not make you a member of the order. Chick always tells us that that's why he made sure the title was Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn Tradition, not Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn. Okay. So you can use that book to very good effect. The Golden Dawn is about spiritual alchemy. It is about, imprinting your psyche with sacred symbols and all this deep stuff that goes on. And all of that you can apply right in your own home from that book without joining an order. But none of that will make you a member of the order. So that's the only difference. Now, having said that, when we're in the order, when we were in the outer order, that book was literally the textbook we used for our actual grade work. So that's how good the book is. That's how complete the book is. There's just a few things in our grade packets that don't appear in that book, but Tabitha Cicero replaced all that with even more material. So you're even getting more out of the Self-Initiation book in some ways than you're getting out of our grade. So when we went through the outer order, they said, hey, you've got the green book, Self-Initiation, just study that. And if you can pass the little tests that we give at the end of each grade session in that book, you will be more than prepared to take the actual test that we'll give you to go into the next grade in the order. So it is a sound book. It is a complete book. It is an awesome book. And if you're interested in the Golden Dawn, very specifically the Golden Dawn tradition and the way that we do things, then that's really the book that you're wanting to look at.
Now, that being said, the experience of actually being in a temple and doing the physical initiations, being there for the work, marching around in circles in funny dresses, once or a few times a month with your brothers and sisters. That also has an incredible impact.
And that's a 100% different experience.
Being in a temple is a very different experience. Different strokes for different folks, but I'm very glad I have the temple. I'm very glad I am in the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, because they very much become our family,
Yeah, and the experiences that I've gained there and the way the initiations have worked and just all of these things, even lectures that I get to hear from other of our frauders and sorors and stuff. It is just amazing. It is absolutely amazing. So yes, the self-initiation is good. And that is, if that's what you have access to, then
If that's what you
Absolutely
prefer, or that's all you can get, grab it.
Either way,
yeah,
it's great.
But it's not the same as being
not quite the same. And it's just...
And, it's real faddish right now for, online. You mentioned magical orders and, they're all outdated and all they do is, hold secrets and it's all just a bunch of old white men. And literally none of that is true.
Literally none of that is true.
We had
there was a higher ratio of female to male.
We had a very big temple meeting yesterday. I think there was probably upwards of 20 people there. And I'd say 13 of them were women. Let me tell you that right now, everyone listening, women are running the Golden Dawn. I mean, they have completely seized the order. Even the original order, Annie Horniman was the name of the woman. She was a friend of Moena Mathers, and they were in art school together. And Annie Horniman was the one who funded the founding of the original order. And her and Moena and Florence Farr, the Golden Dawn has never been a boys' club. Ever. The women have always been in control of the Golden Dawn. The boys are the ones who go out and make all the noise and throw stupid peas at each other and what the hell Mathers and Crowley were doing.
Meanwhile, the women are actually in the background
just running the order. They were actually running the order. Okay. So it's not a boys' club and it's not this irrelevant place because I tell you what, it's very active. There's lots of people. And we're in the Mother Temple, so we see people coming through from all around the world, all of our other temples. It's active, it's growing, and it has a very real impact on the people there. And I can't speak for every temple in the order, but I know where we are. It's no drama. It's not a bunch of infighting and everyone trying to see who's the most powerful, badass wizard. We get together and we do a ritual. Whatever that ritual needs to be, if someone's being initiated or if there's an equinox like last time, or if we don't have anything to do. So we'll just do an invocation of some sort. And then we all have spaghetti and talk and share ideas and we complain. Oh my God, we complain about everybody. And it's gossip and it's all that kind of, stuff. And it's a very relevant community, and it's not at all like what most people listening right now have probably imagined in their heads. A bunch of stuffy old men sitting around congratulating themselves on how awesome they are. It's a lot of people of different ages, and it's mostly women at this point, but the women and the men are both awesome, and it's not a terrible place to be. We go there when life is terrible. We don't get away from there because it's terrible. That's where we go to recharge. And then we sit around congratulating ourselves for how awesome we are. And that's the reality of what's going on there.
The spaghetti, a little bit of wine.
I know I went off on a tangent, but there's just so much of this weird impression. It's like people get an impression of the orders from what they read in texts that were published in the late 1800s and 1920s. Up to the 1920s or so. And they think that's what a magical order is. And
I guarantee you the Victorians were getting up to all kinds of stuff under...
Even what was published in the 18 and early 1900s wasn't what it was really like. So, as always with occultism, misunderstandings and misconceptions abound. And
misinformation, all kinds of stuff.
All we can do is just tell the truth and hope people hear it. I mean, it's not that much fun to hear that it's not a terrible place and that it's just a fun and spiritually uplifting thing. And a lot of very relevant people, our adepts go on to other things, to publish books, to participate in political offices. Some are doctors, some are lawyers, some are, every adept goes off. It's a wide
variety of
and specializes in whatever it is that their true will, their path is drawing them toward. That just makes for an incredible... the order itself is like this launching pad for that. It's a training program. And again, that spiritual alchemy. And you come out the other side, and hopefully some people will stay and become teachers in the order and become people who run temples and stuff. But others will
and share the other work that they're doing with us.
But like I said, others have other true wills and other marks that they have to make on the world, and they go out there and make them. And the reason you don't hear from them is because it's a secret society. They're not out there crowing. They're just out there doing whatever the work is for them. And the only ones you hear from are the loud mouths like me But honestly, most of the loudmouths are the negative one. Most of them, especially on the internet, most of them are people who've never been in the order. They really don't know, but they have every opinion on it, and they'll tell you everything about how it works and doesn't work and what's wrong with it. And they've never even been, it's sad, but the fight against misinformation, that could be a whole show unto itself, couldn't it?
There are those who are always quietly doing the work. And it seems like there's just a lesson there, right? Just to take some time, don't broadcast it, don't do it, just doing the work, whether you're part of an order or a solo grimoire magician,
Absolutely. That's what it should be about, regardless.
It goes back to those powers of the Sphinx, to be silent is the last of the 4 powers of the Sphinx. Some of us may not be great at keeping our mouths shut, but even us, like I've had people ask me, why do you show so much of your magic online? That's not good. And my answer to that is what you're seeing are candle offerings and feast altars. You're not seeing anything that we're doing in our personal work. You're not seeing the real magic that we do. We're showing you things that we've asked the spirits, hey, can we share this so other people can see how we do it? But you'd be amazed at the quiet stuff, That's why I hardly ever talk about the Golden Dawn online, because A, it's pointless, and B, it's a secret society. I'm doing my work with my brothers and sisters quietly, and it's in the silence and the darkness that the seed grows. And that's how, like you said, that's how it should be. There's a lesson there.
To your point, since your angelic altars, for example, were brought up, we do have a listener question. And for the listeners who maybe aren't too familiar, and Aaron and Carrie will correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the great things that you do share online is you have altars to the 7 planetary archangels set up throughout your property, and each of them is specifically dedicated, and there's petitions and offerings done, and with specific planetary timing, and it's just absolutely wonderful to see. We have a question for you about this for both of you from Lucid Themes. And Lucid is asking and saying, welcome back, Carrie and Aaron. I was wondering if you could go more into depth on your practice of giving offerings directly to the angels, because they're seen as emanations of God. Why do they need offerings or dressed candles to work for us? I've gotten into a lot of debates with friends over this topic, so I thought I would ask the experts.
Well, just like any other entity, they need food, they need water, they need energy. That's what it is. And it's also an exchange. You give them something, they give you something in return. And especially in regards to incense, and I'm probably going to totally misquote it here, but the idea of the prayers rising on the incense. Whenever you make prayers, your prayers are basically going up. That's how they're getting to the spirits. That's how they're being conveyed, at least in one sense or another. So there's that aspect of it.
What I tell people, and I actually talk about this in the book Ritual Offerings in the introduction, because that's a big question people have, is why would these entities who are emanations of God, or at least of the Holy Spirit, need your offerings? And the answer is they don't. I mean, if you look at our Archangel Michael, he's the Archangel of the Sun. The sun does not need bread and wine from you to burn. It's going to keep doing what it's doing, probably long after humans have wiped themselves off of the face of the planet. They do not need anything from us to do what God has appointed them to do. But like Carrie said, it's about energy. If you're petitioning Michael to make actual changes here in the physical plane, you're asking for things that are within his jurisdiction as the Archangel of the Sun, but it's not exactly things, that the sun doesn't come down here and do stuff. I mean, other than send its energy. Okay. So you're asking an intelligence here. You're, not just raw sun, but an intelligence of the sun. And you're asking it to come essentially from the spirit world, from the solar sphere, down here to Earth and actually do something, make changes in the astral realm that will manifest as something here in the physical realm. And for that, they do need energy exchange. And so what you're saying, I am asking for this, and here are these offerings I can give you, which, I mean, they can range from anything from food offerings, which are understood to convert to energy that the spirit can consume, to symbolic offerings, like giving them physical representations of the tools and such that they would need to do the job you want them to do. That's very common. And even such things like Carrie mentioned, the incense. There's incenses and oils, and there's a big emphasis. And you can even see this in the Bible when they're talking about making offerings. There's a lot of stress put on burnt offerings. You're always supposed to turn whatever you're offering into smoke, just like incense, and the animals would be burnt and turned into smoke. A lot of emphasis is put on the smell,
the sweet savor of incense.
So because the word spirit means air. Spirits are air. Maybe not, physical, what science would call air, but they're airy creatures. And so throughout history, we've associated them with airy things. So you want to burn incense to them. Like Carrie says, that incense rising up, that's your prayers going up. It's a symbolic link between those two things. The candles you burn, you are offering to them sort of the wax. I mean, that's why you dress it. The oils, the incense and powders,
too.
That all burns. And you're really offering that, and you're offering the flame itself. So you're offering that energy to them. So all of this is energy that is consumed. And on top of all that, you're also showing respect. It's very, very common. In fact, that's why I wrote the book Ritual Offerings, because it's very common for magicians in Western culture to cast a spell and ask for help and offer nothing in return. At the very most, maybe, like I think Donald Michael Craig in his book tells you to project energy at the entity as kind of an offering. But even that's like literally the least you could possibly do. So when, this entity arrives and he looks at one of these feast altars and it's just decked out with all of these foods that are sacred to him and all these objects and gifts, and the incense is burning and all these candles are lit and glasses of water. There's a lot of energy exchange there too. And all of this stuff is just this massive, dynamo of energy that is radiating in your temple space, as opposed to having none of that and maybe just like a paper talisman and then just calling them and demanding what you want and then walking away. Why should they care what you want, after that? So that's the two angles that we come at it from. Both energy and respect is the main issues.
To that very point, Carrie, you were posting recently, you make chaplets that are centered around the archangels, and I recently finished an Anael chaplet. Can you share a little bit with listeners who might not be too familiar? What is a chaplet? And then a little bit about that process of crafting those.
Basically, it's based on the Catholic chaplets. Like you have the rosaries, and then you have chaplets to different saints. And a lot of those have, different number of beads. It's standard to have like Our Father beads, Mary beads in different numbers and configurations and stuff.
And for those who don't know, that's what the rosaries and chaplets are. They're prayer beads. So like on the larger beads, you're supposed to say the Our Fathers, and on the smaller ones, you say the Hail Marys, and you just go around. A rosary is always Mary. The rosary is Mary's. That's what that is. It represents her. It'll always have a Mary medal in the middle of it, and then a crucifix on the end, which is her son.
That's the rosary.
Everyone else is a chaplet.
And people have been making, all kinds of different rosaries now.
Yeah, but traditionally a rosary is a Catholic. Mary.
It may have, I guess, I don't know, it may have some.
But she is the rose. Mary is the rose. So that's why it's called
the chaplets that I generally make, and I do get a lot of different custom orders, people requesting, different numbers of beads, different configurations or whatever, but standard, it's based on the Michael chaplet, the St. Michael chaplet. And then I have them, now we can actually do the 7 different archangels. I've done different saints, all kinds of stuff, but specifically like the Anael chaplet, or whenever I really make any of them, as I'm crafting them, I will do the prayers. I will pray to that entity, like Anael. Kind of a general prayer for, the things that she is in charge of. Love, joy, creativity, all of these wonderful things. That's what I'm kind of doing in the background of creating these chaplets. It takes a while to put everything together with all the wire and beads and stuff. Like this last one, I actually happened to finish on the day and hour of Anael. So I was really happy with that one. I can't always plan it like that, but it's really, really nice when it does. It's a fun little process, but it's also really neat to see the different ideas that people come up with. One of the most popular ones, I got a custom order, I don't know, several years ago for a Gnostic rosary. And it's generally Mary or the Holy Dove in the center.
Sophia.
Yeah. And then like a Celtic cross type of
for some reason, the Celtic, the knotwork crosses are really, and that's not very, specifically very Gnostic really, but for some reason people love
it's an equal armed cross.
Yeah, they love those knotwork crosses. It's really nice.
Oh my goodness, I think I've got 2 on order right now.
I think so.
For the Gnostic.
At least one, but yeah, there might be a couple. And then of course, once she's done putting them together, I take them. We do one of two things. If we're doing a mass, I will consecrate them on the mass altar because we sell them as blessed rosaries. So they're not just mass produced. They're all custom made to order. And then I'll bless them on the altar when we do a mass. If we're not doing a mass, I'll take them into my Holy of Holies, my abramelin altar. I'll actually consecrate them there with abramelin oil. Yeah, so if you ever buy a rosary from us and you smell it and it smells like abramelin oil, you'll know that's how I consecrated it.
That's true of a lot of things.
Yeah.
That really goes to this element of devotion. And I remember, Aaron, in Secrets of the Magical Grimoires, you discuss different kinds of ways that you can effectively generate magical tension. And one of the ways that you call out that's cited in Agrippa is this concept of frenzy, right? PHREN and generating that. And is there a relationship between, like when I was hearing Carrie, you were describing about this process of just this very devotional way that you can approach one of the archangels. By doing that, by the repetition, by the chanting or the engagement, how that generates this magical tension as well.
Any repetitive action is going to put you in a trance state. Like I said, riding around on a lawnmower. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head? That is actually being in a trance. You're in a trance because that's what a trance is. It's a repetitive pattern that's playing through your mind over and over again. Obsessive thoughts, those are a trance. So when you bring that into magic, that's what you're doing is with these repetitive, whether it's day after day after day, like something like abramelin, or if it's just in one ritual, maybe that you're just working for 12 hours or maybe for 7 days, whatever it is. But you have to do these repetitive, monotonous, boring things. If you ever want to know if someone's lying about abramelin, listen to them talk. If they talk about what a wonderful, moving, spiritual experience it was, dude, they're lying to you because abramelin is a mind-numbing, boring. You get about halfway through it and your brain starts saying, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this? I mean, there's nothing fun or moving or enlightening about it. And it's for a purpose because it's to get you in a trance state. Even in a singular operation that's going over for a day, you're doing these chants and it's repetitive. There's not a lot of repetitiveness in one working, but every single time I work at that altar or any of the 7 altars, it's the same process.
Yeah.
I tell my students that spirits are very OCD. Your mind needs the repetitiveness because that puts you in the trance. And then that's why I'll find myself opening up one of the planetary altars and I'll just fly away. I'm not even there. And yet I'm still doing the invocations and all the process because it's all been programmed into my muscle memory and my gray matter. So I don't really have to think about it.
And that's one of the things I think longer term, once you do this long enough, it becomes easier and easier to enter that trance state.
You ingrain it as a pattern that you can slip into rather than having to struggle to get there.
It may work a little different for me.
Yeah, I mean, different, but that's the purpose of the repetition. Like if you open the Key of Solomon, you just see page after page of these monotonous invocations, and it just seems to go on. You'll hear people go, why do I need all that? I've already said it here. I've already said everything that I need to say in this short paragraph. Why show on? The point is, because that short paragraph is not going to put you in a trance state. And if you're trying to scry, if you're trying to talk to these entities, here's another very important thing. And this will be different for different people. But for me, The spirits generally talk to me mostly when I'm actually reading the invocations. So while I'm reading from the book of spirits and going through all these long passages that I've read 1,000 times before, they're in my ear going, this means that. Oh, that's what this means.
Or
hey,
do this,
you should do this.
That,
change that. Hey, I want this on the altar. Hey, don't put that on the altar. And they're giving me instructions and stuff. And more often than not, it's while I'm reading. So it's a very important process of putting yourself in the right state.
And that's whenever we make the holy waters and stuff, I'll read the Psalms.
Yeah, she'll read the Psalms.
And boy, let me tell you, sometimes it's
just fly off.
It's all I can do to stay there and read the Psalms rather than go trailing off into whatever vision or thing I'm being told or what have you.
And then the structure of the invocation or conjuration or the spell you're working is what keeps everything on track. So you're not, when you fly off into the astral, you're not just losing track of what you're doing in the real world. It's very similar to what Timothy Leary used to teach about taking drug trips. The difference between a bunch of kids at a club taking drugs just to trip versus taking drugs in a therapeutic, shamanic manner where you take the drug, but it's part of a system you're following. And that system you're following programs the trip so that you get benefit from it rather than it just being a random thing in a club or, you know, with your friends or whatever. So that's the difference. And that's what you're doing in magic. You're putting yourself into the frenzy. By the way, frenzy was just, they didn't really use the word ecstasy yet. He's talking about ecstatic states. So you're using this repetitiveness to put yourself into the ecstatic state. And that's where all the communication with the spirits happens. And that's where the magic is in the communication.
Whenever we step in front of the altars, we're able to do that because we've done it so much. Yeah. And not just at those altars, but doing that in a variety of ways.
Our work through the Golden Dawn, our neo-pagan work, her, you know, working like Palo and so it's a lot of fidelity between the different traditions. We don't perform a Palo Mayombe, Golden Dawn, Solomonic system.
But even outside.
But we explore all these different paths and each one benefits us, and builds our relationship with the spirits we're working with.
I frequently go on long drives because, we're in the middle of nowhere and that's what I have to do. An hour or two is nothing anymore, but it's very meditative. I put on some music, and the things that I've gotten from that. The walks that I used to take and still do to some, and that's going to be coming back a lot more as the fall comes on, fortunately. But the artwork, the calligraphy, especially the small stuff, whenever I'm writing those very tiny letters and I'm writing, like right now I'm working on something of a personal project and I'm having to put it on a piece of parchment that I'm going to roll up very, very tiny. And it's not a short psalm. So I'm writing it in 2mm Hebrew letters, very, very tiny Hebrew letters. And but it's very meditative because I have to sit there and focus on each letter and trying to make each letter as perfect as I can. And while I'm doing that, I'm kind of going back through and reading that verse of the psalm. There's so much that's going into it. So there's a lot of different meditative practices, but in the end, it kind of all adds up to being able to do that for the most part when you need to.
And what they all have in common is, it's that word meditative is if you're going to communicate with the spirits, and it's a skill that takes a long time to learn just to understand when a spirit is talking to you and it's not just you talking to yourself. And way too many people do make that mistake. True. They do make that mistake. But before you can even get to that step, if you're going to talk to the spirits at all, if you're going to hear them, you have to be able to shut down that monologue that your own brain is always, always, always giving you. And, it sounds very Eastern, and it is very Eastern. It's not that it doesn't exist in the West, but, you can pick up any book on Buddhist meditation, especially calm abiding meditation, which means you're not meditating on something, but you're trying to achieve silence. I recommend, listeners, even if you're studying Western traditions, learn how to meditate. Pure silence of the mind meditation, because that skill is very important. Because again, that's step one, shut off that inner monologue. Tell yourself to shut up long enough to hear messages that might be coming from higher. Then you can start distilling how much of those messages are actually from you and how much are actually from the spirits. And of course, it's always a mixture of both, but that's a different subject. So,
Aaron, this goes directly to what you and Carrie were just talking about relationships and building relationships with these beings. And we have a listener comment from Cabra who wanted to say, I just want to say thanks to Aaron. I heard an interview at the start of 2020 where he talked about how the angels will not give him gifts he doesn't know how to use. The example given was $1 million. Well, I took that advice to heart, Cabra says, and I started being more careful with the gifts that I've been given. Since then, my financial situation has vastly improved, and so has my relationship with the spirits. So Cabra says, wow. Thank you for your perspective.
I always love to hear, success stories like that, where it's so easy for people to take the wrong thing from what you write and say, they'll focus in on one detail and they'll think you mean something by it. And then they think you said that thing and then they misconstrue everything else. And that is so easy to do and happens so often. I mean, I'm an author, so I see this all the time. But man, those gems come through where somebody actually got a gem. They found something in what you wrote and they got it. They understood it and it made sense to them. And I'm really glad that it was helpful. And that's what I do it for, I just love to hear about these particular instances where, someone will tell me, hey, my magic wasn't working and I was struggling and I didn't understand what was wrong. And then I listened to Glitch Bottle, and I hear that all the time. I listen to Glitch Bottle and I heard this interview with you and you said this one thing. So, and that was the thing that was the game changer. That is so awesome to hear. So definitely, you're most welcome. And anyone with a similar story is very welcome.
That also goes directly to this theme that both you and Carrie have been sharing about, which is really about balance. And this next question talks about a couple of traditions that you both have mentioned on the podcast before. And it's a listener question from Cass Young, who is saying, hi, Carrie and Aaron. This question is for Carrie, and Cass is asking, Carrie, being that you are a practitioner of both Palo and Solomonic magic, can you tell us how each of these traditions impacted your life and work, and if one tradition has had a greater influence or impact for you?
They have impacted my life in different ways, but very harmoniously. And that's true of the Solomonic stuff, the Palo stuff, the Golden Dawn stuff, a few other. I mean, I've been really lucky to have a lot of experiences and stuff. But since I keep them so separate, I guess I don't find it difficult to have them in balance. There's
really nothing about one that contradicts anything in the other. Especially Palo. I mean,
the Palo and the Solomonic stuff. Now, many years ago, whenever I first got in the Golden Dawn, I was a little concerned because, it's a very different energy between something like Palo and something like the Golden Dawn. But honestly, I have not found it difficult to maintain any of those practices.
Yeah, I don't seem to care. But I will bring up the fact that these are all traditions that came over with the slave trade. Part of the history of the African traditional religions over here is that they had to hide. Santeria is called Santeria because the Orisha were hiding behind the saints. The saints stood up and hid them and protected them, welcomed them with open arms. So, I mean, even historically speaking, there is no conflict. People get this idea that just because people from different religions like to fight with each other, that all the spiritual entities linked to those traditions are also fighting with each other. And they really aren't. Oh, they have personalities just like anyone else. And I'm not going to put Michael and Samael too close to each other. We've got them over here and they're literally facing two different directions into two different rooms because, mythologically they have a beef with each other and they can have an attitude with each other, so I don't want to put one higher than the other. I don't want to put one's altar higher than the other, or
they're actually on either side of a fireplace.
Yeah, they're on either side of the fire. They're each one on a mantle. They're even. There's considerations like that, but that's more of an individual thing.
And there's an icon of Jesus on the third side between them. And
there's but it's just like if you're running a group, you're going to have personalities that you have to deal with.
I mean, there is
and
a
trauma and all that stuff. Yeah. But I mean, on a grand scale, these entities aren't at war with each other. The saints saw what their idiot followers were doing and they did their best to help. And they hid the Orisha and protected them. And that's why the Centurion tradition exists today. So don't ever think that an archangel is going to be offended by a Palo spirit or a Centuria spirit or something, because those guys have known each other for a long time.
Now, as far as, the ways that they've impacted my life and our lives, they work very differently and on different spiritual levels, I guess.
Palo and the Solomonic stuff are kind of similar.
Yeah.
Not so much in their practice, but they're kind of on the same. They're both spirit work is what I'm saying. And there's a lot of similarity in spirit work, around the world. But
a lot of times where I will, in fact, most of the time, I will start with the archangels, depending on what the situation is. Of course, I'll go to different archangels and stuff. And that's usually through Solomonic stuff. Like the Golden Dawn stuff has been, of course, a lot of spiritual alchemy. There's those kinds of things going on, which allow the changes within myself to go on and do a lot of this other stuff. And then going to the angels to kind of, how do I put this? To bring my prayers of what I need or what I want up to the higher, so we can kind of start working our way down. Like you start opening up the gates there and then go to the next level and the next level, and then finally down to my Ganga. It's not the same for everything, but if there's some, larger working that
it's not doing, then she's not saying we're mixed traditions. It's not one,
absolutely not.
But I mean, we have all of these. We have the 7 altars to the archangels here. She has her Ganga and her ancestor altar as well. And there are other things. And when something happens in our life, give you a good example when we still lived down in Tampa. This is years ago, but a massive storm was going.
Hurricane Irma that had the 5th anniversary just passed.
And we pulled out.
Literally just passed.
Every spirit who lived in the house was set to work that night. So, and that's what she's describing. First
absolutely.
You go, first I'll go to my Abramelin altar. That's the highest. And I'll invoke the highest and I'll get that open and running. Then we'll go to all 7 archangel altars and we'll get all of them awake and tell them what's going on.
And he generally has ones that he generally works with, and there's some that I generally work with, and then some that are kind of
some that we switch off on. And then once we have that level open, then she'll go out to the Ganga, and now she's getting all of these earthy spirits up and saying, "Okay, guys, this is what's happening."
My ancestors, and
so again, we're not making one big spell out of it all in some kind of
Ganesh
and eclectic
all these
ritual.
Other guys that we have.
It's just that they all live here. They are familial spirits. They're familiars. So we go to all of them,
and the land spirits too.
And the land spirits and my 4 Abramelin familiars. But we start at the highest and we tend to work our way down the categories, and so we get everybody awake and operating. So everyone just lives here and they get along together, and none of these different classes of spirits seem to have any issue with each other that we've ever been aware of, and so, it all seems to work together like a fairly well-oiled machine after all these years.
And the only time that, I've ever had anything that's even remotely come up like that, it's like, oh, yeah, I already knew about that. So you need to be over here and you need to be over here. You guys can't be around each other. Okay.
Yeah, they'll tell you where they want to be and who they want to be around, what they want on their altar. This is all part of that communication you get with them once you can learn to start hearing them. And it's not, and I don't just mean hearing, but I mean receiving messages in whatever way they're sending them, whether it's
because they will send them in all kinds of different
dreams
ways.
and visions, sudden inspirations. You might hear a voice, you might not, it might be
hear
a song that comes on the radio.
Conversation.
It might be a statement someone makes in a television commercial. It could be, whatever the universe brings to you as the message. You've asked for the message, and then you wait for the message to come. It's an art and a science.
To that very point about relationships and deepening things, we have a listener question from Michael. And Michael is saying, in your book, you place much emphasis upon magic as relational in nature. We form alliances and deep relationships with spirits over the course of time instead of the drive-through approach. And so Michael's asking, are these skills applicable to our human relationships? Could we form better bonds with others and mitigate how social media conditions us to relate to each other?
It's an interesting question. I've thought about this a little bit, and it's kind of hard to answer because, on the one hand, you have to assume that if someone is putting the kind of effort into their magic that is required to build those relationships, and we get this from my teacher, Oshani Lele, and, in Palo and Santeria, that's dedication. That is a lifelong commitment you are making to doing these rituals every day. That is what I aspired to in my Solomonic practice, is to revive that in the West. And so, I know not everyone can do all this stuff. You hear us talking about this altar and all these altars and then this Ganga and this Ancestral altar. Not everyone can have all of that, even if you just got one altar, So if you're putting that kind of effort into it, and you're not in the mindset of, I can just say these words, make a demand, and the genie will fulfill my wish, then that has to have an impact on the rest of your life, doesn't it? You're in a completely different context at that point. You're thinking differently at that point. So I can only imagine that would have to positively affect your ability to have relationships. But on the other hand, the reason I say it's a difficult question, the other half of this is that having relationships with spirits is both like having a relationship with a person and not like having a relationship with a person. They don't have bodies. They don't have the same motivations that a person would have. If my familiars don't hear from me for several weeks, they might be a little miffed, or they might be like, hey, where the hell have you been? But it's not that big a deal. My entire lifetime would go by for them in like no time, so it's not a big a deal. If my wife doesn't hear from me in several weeks, you get a problem. So there are differences. There are differences. And a lot of dealing with spirits is an ambassadorial art. Whereas that, again, can give you a context to some extent for how to deal with people in your day-to-day life and your relationships with people you care about. You also don't want to treat the people you care about like an ambassador would treat another ambassador. Okay. Being ambassadorial is a very legalistic kind of thing. It's a very transactional kind of thing. You are saying things in a certain way to get a certain response from the spirit.
Whereas if you do that with your family, you're a terrible person.
Yeah, I couldn't suggest using that with your family. So yeah, that's why I'm of two minds. So yeah, I think it could be beneficial to understand how important relationships are, why it's necessary. When you call a spirit or an angel and you ask for help, you should be able to answer why that spirit or angel should give a damn about you, about helping you. And the relationship you build with them over time is the answer to that. But yeah, please don't treat your boyfriend or girlfriend the way you would treat your familiar spirit,
and don't treat your familiar spirits like they would be your boyfriend or girlfriend
for
either.
God's sake, don't do that. And I've been hearing that kind of thing on TikTok, and it's not good. Please don't do that. So it's a yes and no kind of thing, and it's a thing you'd have to find balance in.
And also at Solomon Springs, I know you both care very deeply about relationships with other living creatures. And Carrie, you have recently shared some great videos of Charlotte, a lovely spider in Solomon Springs, who is making, new webs and up to spidery business. When listeners are out there, magically minded listeners, and they encounter spiders or other living creatures in nature or around their homes, of course, treating them with, respect as living creatures. Absolutely. But do you have any magical tips that you recommend that they can or should keep in mind in order to honor these creatures that they might find?
In general, just honoring them as the nature that they are, just appreciating them. And it goes without saying, but, not harming them, of course, but, just a little extra appreciation, like, wow, this is a really cool experience. And sometimes it is just that. It's like, wow, that was just a really cool experience, But then sometimes there is something different to it. It's a different interaction. The thing with Charlotte and with the spiders, I have had interactions with spiders since I was a small child. And for years and years and years, I didn't understand it. I guess I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I finally accepted it, because I had just really bad arachnophobia. I mean, little tiny, like what I now know are jumping spiders, but when I was a kid, I was terrified of them. One of my favorite ones we have, I forget their official name, but here they're known as banana spiders. And they can get about as big as the palm of your hand. Yeah. They're pretty big. And they make giant webs with this beautiful golden colored silk. I was about, 7 or 8 years old. And we had moved down to the Keys, me and my parents. And I was at school one day. And I'd fallen off the monkey bars. And whenever I went to get up, I got a face full of banana spider. And of course, at that age, this thing's as big as my face. But I've remembered it to this day. I mean, vividly remember it. And I've had these kinds of things happen over the years.
Yeah, spiders wouldn't leave her alone.
I sat in a nest of black widow spiders one time, just around the time we got together.
Yeah.
Totally fine.
They didn't
Totally fine. I have widows out on my porch now. But yeah, spiders, over time, I ended up having to accept that this was a thing. And since I did that and started kind of understanding what the spirit of that is, because spiders are very magical creatures, weaving webs. I mean, they're known in legends throughout the world as weavers, as magicians, as, just all kinds of things, tricksters, all kinds of things like this. But once I started kind of understanding the more magical spirit type thing of it, I started learning a whole lot. And that's stuck with me. And as I get to know the different spiders and, kind of talk to them, because, I'll talk to the widows out here, I'll talk to Charlotte or, whatever. Yeah, just every now and then I'll just get interesting information or a vision of how something might work, or, just little different things like that. And that's true of a lot of the different flora and fauna.
And once you start studying these things,
learning the spirit of plants,
right?
How they work, getting to know them. Again, going back to relationships, it's all about building those relationships, and what they can teach you.
What you have to do is study, if there's a particular animal, like with her and spiders, and
I have several that are going on.
I've got my spirit totem. I've got hawk. I've got bat. And the Golden Dawn, of course, because of the Greco-Egyptian archangels that people often confuse with being Egyptian deities. They're, the animal head. So Thoth, the ibis, and Horus, the hawk. And in all of these cases that I've just mentioned of these different animals, is you have to study the lore of the animal through history. Yeah. Like in the Golden Dawn, those animals mean something. And spiders, like she said, you study the history of spider deities and spider folklore, and the more of that you pack into your head, the more the universe can use these animals to send you messages. There's this whole collection of lore associated just with crow calls and what they mean from different, bird augury.
Yep.
And so we listen for crows around the house and we interpret what they mean. So yeah, you got to know the lore, but other than that, you'll notice none of this involves messing with the animal in any way, taking the spiders taking their webs or collecting their skins or anything.
My house is covered in spider webs.
Yeah. And the main thing is, like they say, they don't need our protection. They need our absence. They need us to what they need is for us to leave them alone. So, Charlotte spun her web. And this is why this has gone viral, I guess. This
I found it very interesting.
Called a barn spider?
Yeah, she is a barn spider.
It's a barn spider. And she decided to spread her web, cast her web right across the front walkway of our house.
At the entrance of our
And we had to put a blue bucket in the middle of the walkway to remind us it was there, because I walked out and got a face full, not of Charlotte. She darted out of the way just as I hit. She's a fast little thing. Just as I hit and destroyed her web, and she had it back up within an hour. And when she put it back up, she left a doorway for us to go through.
She generally leaves a doorway for us to go through.
And it turned out she's a barn spider, and we found out that a barn spider is what Charlotte was. So I ended up I'd be out there like, all right, Charlotte, what you doing? And when we get our house, because like Carrie said, our house has been absolutely covered in webs on the outside, all the bushes and the eaves of the house. I mean, the house. 1 year, and it was really bad that 1 year. I say bad, it was actually awesome, but it was a lot of them. And they just coated everything with webs.
Yeah, we had black and yellow garden spiders, banana spiders, various kinds of
barn spiders. Black widow spiders,
weavers,
brown widows.
I mean, just
and
if it was a spider and lived in Florida, it built its web around my house.
Yeah, and what they were doing was protecting us.
Yeah, and that's with her web across across the front too.
Yeah, and with her putting the web across the entryway, anything spiritual trying to come. Think of the web as like a natural dream catcher. So any spiritual entity trying to come into the house is going to hit that web and get lost in the patterns of the web. Remember we talked about spirit traps before? That's a spirit trap for you. It's a natural magic circle that will confuse any spirit trying to pass it. We don't mess with them or do anything with them. We let them interact with us the way they want to. They do some powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I remember that. I remember you were mentioning about, patterns and the circumference of a circle, or scattering specific patterns, or things that, vampires in certain mythologies would be so busy.
Grains of rice, or shattered glass, or pebbles, or things that will make them stop. It'll distract them. Yeah. Spirit, like I said, spirits are OCD. They need repetition. They need patterns. They're completely at the mercy of patterns, because that's what the astral is. It's patterns. It's the patterns that everything in reality is based on. They are really at the mercy of patterns on their side. So every time you do a ritual and you decide to just switch it up because you want to, it's actually lessening the ritual, because it's
breaking the pattern.
Imagine being a mother dealing with an autistic child. Any child
to follow. They have to have routine.
You have to follow that routine. And when you break that routine, they break down. It's the same with spirits.
And adults too. We need some of our routines.
And adults, I'll tell you what. Yeah. The pandemic taught us when your routines get messed up, it hurts. We're still trying to recover and get back, into
some kind of routine.
With Doc Solomon's, and like I said, we're trying to take care of the land properly, which we didn't for 3 years. I mean, it's like patterns are important. And habits and routines. So it's not exciting, but there it is.
Chop wood, carry water.
Chop wood, carry water.
That's right. That's right. In fact, one could even say that the Abramelin ritual, as you were talking about, it's just that grind. So perhaps chopping esoteric wood and carrying esoteric water is whether it's the 6 month or the 18 month, right?
Or the 18. Yeah, it's the same thing. Even in the Golden Dawn, you join the Golden Dawn, you get your neophyte. And traditionally, you're only supposed to be given the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. And we tell you to go do that for 6 months every day, at least once, if not twice a day, because it's monotonous and soul sucking and boring. And by the end of that 6 months, you will have ingrained the pattern of that ritual into your mind and into your aura. Those grooves that you've cut into your aura is what all the rest of the order's magic fits into. It all follows that same pattern. So again, it's patterns and repetition.
And by another token, it's something that, the spirits can see. So it's another one of those things that gets ingrained into you.
Yeah, and they need the pattern. They need it ingrained as well. If you set up a new altar, again, let's go back to Michael. We set up an altar to Michael. It's not the Michael coming down from the sun and inhabiting our altar, and then nobody else in the world can talk to or summon Michael because we've got him here. When you set up the altar, Michael gives you a piece of himself. He literally births a new child into the icon of the altar. And that child spirit is Michael. The whole of Michael is in him. He's basically a clone of Michael, but he's a young clone, and he will grow as you work with him at the altar, and you will grow as you work with him at the altar. And again, like we said, this takes years. And if you work that altar for years and years and years, you'll build up what in the African traditions they call ashe, power. It means a lot more than power, but it's ashe. And the more you work it, the more ashe builds up in it, and the stronger and the bigger that spirit gets. And if you are a good person and you're putting that spirit to good purpose, the spirit will be good. And if you are a bad person and you use it for selfish ends and you use it to hurt people, you'll corrupt the spirit, and you'll end up with a corrupted and broken and even evil version of that spirit. So
good luck with that.
It's all about the relationships you build.
In terms of this theme of relationships and how some relationships, as you say, they can be deep and amazing. Other relationships, there might be some distance needed. And we also, to that very point, have a listener question from Kisa, who is asking and saying, "Hi, Aaron and Carrie. Aaron, after your class, I created the altars for the planetary archangels. And at the beginning, everything was great. But then I started to have weird visions when I went to sleep. I heard voices between the state of sleeping and being awake. Some of them told me that they were going to harm me, and I saw disturbing faces like eyes without pupils. And someone recommended me to remove the altars because the altars could attract parasites. So after I removed them, my sleep has been mostly okay." So Keith is asking, I'm wondering if you've had this experience with altars, and what could I do to protect my altars from attracting parasites?
It's not really a matter of the altars attracting parasites. I think that's just the way the person she was talking to put it. But the thing is, anytime you do magic, if it's an altar, if you're practicing the LBRP, anything you're doing, you are lighting up the astral. If you're invoking light, you're lighting up the astral plane, and it will attract whatever the local fauna of the astral is. It will attract them. They'll be interested. Some of it will be attention you want. If you're putting intention to starting this path, and your guardians and the angels will know and see and arrive and watch. But also there might be little parasites and astral nasties and little things that show up and flit around, and like moths being tracked to a flame. So that can't be really avoided. But a lot of what a person will experience when they do that is based on their own situation. Some people will be more sensitive to what's going on the astral than others. So, you can imagine setting up all these altars, and now all of a sudden you're getting all this input, all of this, you're being bothered by all these spirits and all this activity. If you're sensitive to it, where another person may not be, they may struggle with their astral senses, and therefore they just don't feel any of that, and it doesn't bother them. And I think in Kiss's case, I think that is a lot of what's happening. And of course, the second part of that, though, is, and I talk about this a little in the classes, that initiation can be important too. Because we've talked about relationships, but what we haven't really hit on too much yet is authority, spiritual authority. And, when you're dealing with these entities, you are to them just another monkey that's coming to them to pester them for something. And, a big part of making those offerings and earning their respect is to set yourself apart from all of the other people who pester them. And when you can set yourself apart from them, you get respect and you start generating spiritual authority. Jumping right into the Solomonic tradition can be dangerous because it's not an initiatory system. It's a system of spirit working. Whereas, like, we joined the Golden Dawn, Carrie and I, and we've been going through their system of initiation. So we've had that benefit, as you go through these initiation ceremonies. Not only are you being introduced to a lot of these angels and spirits by officers who themselves have the authority to do so, you're not just cold contacting these spirits. It's someone who already knows them going, hey, Aaron, meet, Archangel Michael. You guys are going to be friends. And that's what the initiation does. It's introducing you to. And as you go up through these initiations and you're introduced to these spirits and you're working with them, you're gaining their respect. They're changing you through this initiations process itself. And when you come out the other side, like in the Bible, when the spirits, before Jesus came along, a man was possessed and some exorcists were trying to exorcise the spirits from the man. They're saying, in the name of St. Paul and in the name of Jesus, I command you out. And the spirit said, yeah, St. Paul we know and Jesus we know, but who are you? So I can see where, setting up all these altars, if you haven't gone through an initiatory process, it's almost like a workout. It's like if you want to be a bodybuilder, you're going to have to work out. There's exercises to do, meditations to do, parts of yourself, damaged parts of yourself to fix. And everyone wants to dismiss, confession and things in the grimoires that talk about, and in Christianity in general, about how we're all miserable sinners and how we need to break out of this idea that we're all bad people the way Christianity wants us to think. And I agree. But I think we can take it to the other end, the other extreme, just as badly, where it's just this YOLO attitude. I don't care what anybody thinks, even if I hurt people around me, because screw you, I'm going to get mine.
IDGAF.
And I am exactly
Period.
Perfect the way I am, and therefore I will never learn anything. I will never grow. I will never change. So you've got to find the balance there. And that's why I think confession is important, is fixing the parts of yourself that your parents damaged, your teachers damaged, the preacher in your church when you were a little kid damaged, your friends in school damaged. I mean, television and all of this input you got through your entire life that none of it had your best interest at heart. And you've got to fix all that. And like in Kiss's position or situation, I should say, she set up all these altars and got all these energies coming in, but not necessarily the inner strength. And again, I'm going back. When I say inner strength, I mean like that bodybuilder reference. She had not developed the muscles inside her magical muscles, her astral muscles, in order to handle those incoming energies and to have the authority to stand up and go, all right, everyone, quiet down, and that takes time.
And also to train your own brain not to obsess on it too.
Yeah. Because that's what spirits love to do, is get you to obsess on things and divert you from your work.
Yep.
Actually, this is interesting because, Carrie, you brought up earlier about, of course, reading the Psalms. And I know Aaron also deeply shares about the power of the Psalms. We have a listener question for you both from Lucid Themes, who is asking, Aaron and Carrie, how much does scripture reading and normative religion play a role in your lives?
It does. I'm an ordained priest.
Yeah.
And she's a deacon.
And we do mass and
we
stuff.
Do hold mass
and it is
here.
Absolutely lovely.
It's not nearly as regular as I think we probably should be doing mass, but we do it a few times a year.
Specifically, reading the Psalms features pretty heavily in a lot of our work.
In both the religion and the magic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of power in the Psalms. And, I think that's why there's so many, I don't know about versions, but the use of the Psalms. You have it in the 5th and 6th books of Moses.
6th and 7th books of Moses. That
one. The Book of Gold. I know there's several.
Use of the Psalms by Selig. Godfrey
Selig. And I know there's several others too.
It was kind of a lost tradition. I don't want to brag too much, but I kind of think I helped bring it back because.
Well, it features heavily in hoodoo and stuff too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So. I mean, there's power of the Psalms, and you can still buy those at Botanicas. But as far as like in Western magic, I think even a lot of people that were using the grimoires, kind of in a Golden Dawn context, or even a Thelemic one. They would use Golden Dawn or Thelemic rituals along with the grimoires, but you don't find those rituals in the grimoires. A lot of books that you could read at the time would skip over the Psalms. They would just grab the conjurations and the seals. And like she said in Hoodoo, the book, The Power of the Psalms, which is basically just use of the Psalms by Godfrey Selig. They just rename it and sell it as Power of the Psalms, or it's had several titles throughout the years. That's kind of a rare exception to the use of Psalms and magic through the Hoodoo tradition and stuff. But even in the Golden Dawn and stuff, you don't really see a lot of Psalms being made use of.
Yeah.
And I wanted to reintroduce that in the book Secrets of the Magical Grimoire to a wider audience. And so that's why I had the whole chapter in there just on psalmody, because that's an extremely powerful book.
It's so is.
The ancient Sabians actually adopted the Book of Psalms as their holy book. You could take that book alone out of the Bible, and it's a full holy book all by itself. And there's a lot of magic and power in there. So I don't know. I've just always really dug that Shakespearean poetry that the King James Version uses for the Psalms. And, you start employing those in the magic. And I don't mean you have to use the King James, but you start using those Psalms. And for me, I always use the King James because I love that poetry. Yeah. And it really made such a night and day difference. It's like the spirits, well, again, it's that repetition. So for hundreds of years, the people who wrote these grimoires were using those Psalms heavily.
And it's not just that, but think of all the people throughout the world and history that
have used them.
Used the Psalms. I mean, the Psalms are used heavily in Catholicism.
Right. And which is the origin of it. And if you actually perform one of the rituals in, say, the Key of Solomon, you'll find yourself spending most of the ritual standing or sitting in front of the altar reading Psalms. It's almost like what you're really doing is just giving a religious service. And the talisman you're consecrating just happens to be sitting on the altar, or whatever it is you're trying to do. But they will just give lists of, a dozen Psalms, and some of the Psalms may be really long. So you might have to tuck in for a good half an hour or 45 minutes of just sitting there reading Psalms. I wanted to show how powerful that was, because when you do that, the spirits react. Because again, like I said, the authors of the grimoires were doing that. So if we hear hundreds of years later, it's been about 400 years, hundreds of years later, we use these same spells, but we leave out the Psalms, the spirits literally, that's breaking their OCD. It's breaking the ritual. It's breaking what they're used to. So by re-employing the Psalms the way they were meant to be used, it actually opened doors.
And we do also use scripture, of course, whenever we're doing Mass. There's the gospel reading. There's, several other things in there. It does feature pretty heavily in our little world. So, and then, of course, I actually, whenever I'm like practicing calligraphy or a new hand or whatever, my go-to thing is basically the Psalms and or the Song of Solomon. But it's usually the Psalms and the Song of Solomon, of course, because of my connection to Anael. And there again, it's a very meditative process.
Yeah,
to not only read it, but to physically write it and meditate on all these things.
And what all this really has in common, from whether it's just the normative religion, we're doing our masses, and I even consider my Abramelin part, because I have to go in there every Sunday and do the prayers and stuff. It's not doing practical magic. It's just maintaining the relationship. So that's all the normative religion. But even then, it's still all mystical. There's nothing in the Bible that we interpret the way like a fundamentalist Christian would. It is a spiritual writing, and it has a spiritual meaning. It was written by people who understood that, and it was written for people who understood that. And anyone who thinks that you're supposed to take the Bible literally does not understand the text. So, yeah, whether it's normative religion or magic, and we're employing the scriptures, we're always interpreting them mystically.
I always have to chuckle because you always see maybe a couple stories online, or actually know someone who, didn't know too much about the grimoires. And you get that person on the outside going, I want to summon demons and I want to do it by the book. And then the first thing they do, say the Lemegatons Goetia, the Heptameron, they open it expecting it's going to talk about the sword and the sigils of the no, it's go to confession, receive the Eucharist, fast. And they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So the demon doesn't eat you.
what they find is it's not like the Hollywood movie or the comic book that they read, or they're expecting it to be very
right,
flashy. And I mean, it can be flashy, but it's usually not. It's usually boring. Because, go to confession and say all these prayers and spend 7 days taking showers. And that's what it's like, because, again, that repetition. And it's also about dedication, As I mentioned before, making yourself stand up from the 1,000 other monkeys that are pestering them for BS, and making the spirits actually respect you. So when you show up, they actually want to listen to you,
Aaron, you have such a great quote that I repeat to many people, saying, well, as Aaron said, is you share that when it comes to the key of Solomon, the greater key, or when it comes to the lesser key, the Lemegeton, that the reason why they're called keys is because that's what they are. They simply open the door, but then it's up to you to step in and discover this mansion of many rooms that's up to you to develop your own relationship with. And I think this goes to the next listener question for both of you from Lucid Themes, who's saying, Aaron and Carrie, with more resources becoming available to make Abramelin and evocation more palatable for a 21st century magician, how important is sticking to the book to you? How should these practices change as society changes?
Yeah, see, there's so much unspoken context that may be in it. First of all, I don't know what he means by resources. Like, what resources? Because I could see two different meanings to that. He could be talking about the way, like you've got the Solomonic group, and you've got my 101 classes, you've got Secrets of the Magical Grimoires, Ritual Offerings, my Enochian books. I'm just focusing on me there, but I'm not trying to be me-centric. I mean, if you go into Secrets of the Grimoires, there's Joseph Peterson, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce his name. It's Johannes Matthias or Mathetis. He's one of my moderators. He's an author on the Grimoires. He's in there. And Stephen Skinner. God, I could just keep going on. There's so many great people in there. Adam Jonathan, and Balthazar was in there for a while, even though he basically disappeared off the face of the earth. But there's so many wonderful people in there offering really good resources. And I hope that's what the questioner was asking about. Because the other thing it could mean is, because he said making it more palatable to the 21st century. And I hope he doesn't mean all this stuff like chaos magic and all this stuff that's trying to 21st century-ize magic, because there's nothing of value there, honestly.
See, for me, we both tend to be pretty traditionalist. And, for me, if anything, I tend to kind of go back in time rather than forward.
Yeah. And it's not just a matter of, just because it's older, it's better. We get accused of that a lot.
No.
What we're interested in is what works. And, if it's just the bottom line that the modern stuff, the stuff that is, purporting itself to be the newer, better, more powerful magic, because you post a couple of memes in a group, or masturbate over a piece of paper with a line drawing on it, or, whatever. The least amount of effort. That's not making anything more palatable to the 21st century. That's just playing into the fast food menu ordering, no effort, push a button, and it produces what you want mentality. And that's not powerful. You're not going to get anything from the spirits like that. You're going to be one of those 1,000 monkeys that is pestering them. If you get any response, that's not just yourself talking to yourself. If you get any response from them, they're probably just going to be jerking you around because they think you're funny, so it's not a way to respect. It's not a way to real power, magically speaking. So I hope he's talking about the former, the good resources, the things, that real scholars and practitioners are able to offer now, because we're still doing the real work and studying the books, studying the history and the context of those books, putting them into practice in today's world, the 21st century, and seeing how that material translates. Now that goes to the second part of the question, which was about how important is it to follow the book? That's a difficult question to answer without running into misunderstanding. Like I said before, I'll say or write something and it'll be misconstrued, and I don't want that to happen here, because one thing that is thrown as an insult at traditional Solomonic magicians a lot is you're slavishly following the book. In case your listeners don't know what slavishly means, it means that you are blindly and without understanding just following by rote what the book says. That is very much not what we do. There is very much an aspect of what we do because we are practicing this tradition in the modern world where, yes, it does employ for instance, I don't kindle a fire. I have a lighter. You know what I'm saying? I have fully modern LED lights around all of my altars. Each string of lights is the color of that planet, according to the Solomonic system. They wanted them. It started with Michael. He was in our living room. This is years and years ago. And we decorated for Christmas. And I approached his altar and he said, hey, and he indicated the Christmas lights. And he said, how come I don't have those? So I took a string of Christmas lights and I wrapped them around his altar and it spread from there.
And they like Christmas garland too.
They love
several of
the lights.
In fact, everybody has garland.
Yeah, and none of that.
The lights twinkle off of them, and it's all sparkly and stuff. And
so, we haven't done anything to alter the tradition to make it 21st century. There's no need for that because there's nothing wrong with the system. Training lions is still training lions today, just like it was thousands of years ago. We have better equipment for it today. We have, even newer methods and stuff.
You may have acquired a better understanding.
But lions are still lions, and you need to know how to wrangle lions if you're going to wrangle lions. Okay. So it's the same thing with spirits. And there's nothing that's outdated in the old books. Now, maybe I don't need spirits to make my enemies' wounds fester, or maybe I don't need that.
Or maybe you do.
Maybe you do. But, there may be functions that the spirits would have been put to in the old world that we really don't need today. But the methods, the actual how to work with spirits is never going to change. Just like it's never going to change no matter how advanced humans get. Unless we find a way to leave our bodies or something. As long as we have physical bodies, we're always going to need oxygen and food and certain kinds of food and places to go to the bathroom and shelter. And being a human is being a human, and being a spirit is being a spirit. And nothing is going to just magically change because now it's the 21st century. When it comes to following the instructions in the book, yes, because you are reading the texts of people who knew how to wrangle spirits, and they're trying to teach you how to. So yes, you can't just go through there and pick, well, I don't like that. Well, I like that. Oh, well, I don't like that. No, you need to learn the art and you need to take it all in. And so you do have to follow the book. But are you slavishly following it? No, you need to understand the instructions. You need to understand why you're being told to do this, to do that, to not do this. And if you understand the whys behind all the instructions, and as you said, you use those instructions to make contact with the spirits, and then the spirits can tell you what to change. The spirits can say, why did you say that conjuration to me? I don't need that conjuration. Don't use that again. Or they'll say, hey, use this conjuration instead. Or they can change anything about the ritual. Anything that you see in the grimoire can be changed by one of the spirits of the system if they tell you this is what we want or require. So no, there's never a point where you should be doing it slavishly, where you are doing it without understanding, because that's not going to work. There's too much that's left unwritten in the grimoires. So yeah, just following them blindly isn't going to work anyway. And then if you understand how the system works and your spirits understand what's going on, then the two of you together as you grow can make changes. Now, having said that, I want to add one last caveat. Let's say you're going to go out in the world and tell people that you are a goetic magician, as in the Lemegeton's goetia, that you're using the goetia. You are an expert in the goetia. Then damn it, use the book. Don't draw from it and add it to your own system. Don't make 1,000 changes to it before you've talked to the spirits. Don't make 1,000 changes to it. Don't make up your own system that's kind of like the goetia and then run around telling people that you use the goetia. Okay, so in that sense, if you're going to claim that you are using a particular book or system, then be truthful and know that you can truthfully say, I have used this book. I put the experiment of this book into practice, and here are my results. Yeah, it all goes both ways. Yes, follow the book. You can't make changes until you know what you're doing anyway, and you can't make changes until the spirits tell you what changes to make anyway. You can never be slavish about it. You must always understand it and study, know the context behind the text and its history and the folklore and history of the spirits you're working with. And I could go on forever, but hopefully I made my point on that.
Every single grimoire traditionalist that I know, every single one who follows the book step by step, instinctively, naturally, as both of you just said, develops their own idiosyncratic relationship to it. So you're right. It's a both and. They show fidelity to the tradition. They're dipping their toes in the same streams that hundreds of magicians before them have. But it's also a unique thing that's just for them, which is great.
Exactly. It's your spirits. It's your spiritual army. Our 7 archangels here are not the same 7 archangels you would be working with. You know, they are tailored to our psychology, and our psychology is tailored to them. And, you know, that's, again, growing together, building that relationship together.
Aaron, when we talk about relationships with spirits and Solomonic history, you have also been sharing, and I love this phrasing, magical PSAs, magical public service announcements. And I would love it if you could elaborate on a recent magical PSA you shared where you said, quote, the word sigil means signature. It's the signature of a spirit or force of nature, etc. It's something you put on a talisman. You prepare a talisman, not a sigil. Saying it that way is like writing a thesis paper and calling it a paragraph. So can you share a little bit about that for listeners who maybe they just started learning about Solomonic magic and they're like, okay, sigil, talisman, what would you like them to know?
God, it's probably even been 10 years or more that this has been going on. Oh, probably way more than 10 years. I'm old, so time flies by. I think it comes through largely the chaos magic influence is calling a talisman a sigil. Well, I'm going to prepare a sigil. I need to pay my rent this month. I need to make a sigil. Those magical PSAs are very often about misunderstandings of terms, and this is one that's misunderstood. And because it keeps getting repeated in book after book, a person may have read 10 books on magic, and every one of them referred to talismans as sigils. And then I come along and I'm like, by the way, it's not called a sigil. So that's why the PSA, because it's information people don't really run into. Sigil is Latin for signature, sigillium. It is literally your signature. You remember I said earlier that your relationships with the spirits is often very ambassadorial and legalistic. You're making deals with them, you're setting petitions before them, and you're negotiating payments in the form of what offerings you'll give and that kind of thing. So the legalistic side of that is that you are kind of making, let's go back to the witch trials when they would have, they'd bring into court a contract that the victim had supposedly, I say victim, the defendant had supposedly, made with a demon, and the demon would have signed at the bottom. And they would use that to literally convict a human being and sentence them to prison or death, But even beyond that, your own signature can be used that way. If you sign your name to something, you are literally placing yourself in a position where other people with guns can show up and come and put you in a cage, depending on what contract you signed and what you needed to do to fulfill it. You know what I'm saying? So you can be dragged into court based on that scribble that you put on a piece of paper. So signatures are powerful. Even in the mundane world, they are extremely powerful. And it's no different for the spirits. They have signatures. They can sign their names. Those signatures we call sigils, and we record them. Magicians in the medieval era would contact these entities and say, show me your signature. And they would write the signature into the grimoire. That's how a true spirit book works. You summon the spirits to the book and ask them for their sigils to put in that book. And only you, it'll be a unique sigil. It'll be the spirit signature, but only you will have access to it. Another magician will get a different signature. Those grimoires that survived are the ones we use today. So whenever you think of a spirit sigil or seal, those are just old instances where either a magician asked for a sigil or maybe created one based on various occult processes that you can use to create a sigil. For if you don't know the signature of an entity, you can create a temporary one until you can contact the entity and ask it for a true one. And it's very legalistic. If the entity, quote unquote, signs his name to something, he then is linked to that thing, just like you are linked to a contract. So if you have a talisman bearing the sigil of that entity, you're holding the contract in your hand. So whatever petition you've made to that entity and whatever that entity has agreed to do, the sigil is the contract. And anything that bears that sigil, whether it's the talisman or anything else you scrawl it on, that thing becomes on some level the property of that spirit. So, that's what a sigil is. It's the name of the entity in his own language, if you want to look at it that way. And having the true name of something, having someone's signature, just like in the legal world, gives you power, legalistic power over that entity, which is why you also have spiritual authority. Because I can run up to you and flash a badge in your face and say freeze, and you'll probably deck me in the face because I just ran up to you and threw something in your face. If a police officer runs up to you and holds a badge up to your face and says freeze, you're going to freeze. So the personal authority you hold is just as important as the action you're taking. You got to have the sigil. You got to have the authority to enforce whatever, the agreement was, basically. That is the essence of a sigil. And the talisman is the physical object that has the sigil on it. So I think it just became kind of
like a contract is what your signature is on.
When you sign a contract, you don't hand it back and say, hey, I'm glad we have this signature. No, you hand it back and go, here, I've signed this contract. The contract is the thing you put your sigil on. So that's what that PSA was for, because people keep using the term sigil in the wrong way. And if they come into the Solomonic group and start talking about sigils in the wrong way, it can lead to a lot of confusion, because people in there know what the word sigil actually means. And they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you put a sigil under somebody's car? Was it on anything, or did you just write it on the ground under their car? So
right. Which that can be done.
Which you can do that. And that didn't actually happen. I just came up with that. But that's the purpose of that PSA. Because so many terms today are used incorrectly. And if you read the old texts and you think the words mean the same thing, then you can get very confused. You don't understand what the old texts are saying because you don't know what the words meant.
Speaking of relationships and context and the importance of showing fidelity to the past, but also making your own unique practice, we do have a listener question, a forward-looking question from Lucid Themes, who is asking, Aaron and Carrie, what are your thoughts on where a culture is headed? Do you see lineages and lodges as being able to grow in this modern instant gratification environment?
To answer your one question, will these lineages survive? Will lodges survive? And as far as I can see, yeah, it will. There's actually a theme that we were talking about fairly recently. And
right at the beginning of this, we were talking about the lodges and how they're not these outdated, dying things that people think they are.
Right.
There's a lot going on.
For all the talk about lodges and stuff, the number of initiates that we have, especially going on up into the higher grades and into the inner order and stuff, I don't think has ever been as high as it is right now.
Yeah, it was kind of incredible. We did an equinox ceremony yesterday. I don't know how familiar you are with the Golden Dawn rituals, but when you perform the equinox, you have to open the hall, and there's a first part of the ritual, and then all of the outer order members have to leave because there's an inner order only section of the ritual, and that's where the Hierophant is installed for the semester. And then all the outer order members come back and are introduced to their Hierophant. Now, we've been in the temple going on 25 years almost.
Yeah,
it's probably maybe 23 years or so. And we've seen the equinox go by many, many, many times. And we've watched as almost everybody gets up out of the temple for that inner order part. Almost everyone gets up and leaves and goes and is sequestered, while maybe three or four people,
5, 6 maybe
are left in the inner.
6 was a high number.
Yeah, adepts who are there to participate in the inner order ritual. And over the years, we've watched that go till yesterday. Like I said, we had like 20 people there.
There was like 17 or 18, yeah.
3 people got up to leave and go be sequestered. Almost all of those people were adepts. That means the order is strong. That means, even when Chick passes away, and this entire first generation, once the whole first generation has passed away, even, it's still going to be gone. Back when we joined, they had a thing called filling the rows. I learned about this. I had only been in maybe a few months, I think, when I heard about filling the rows. And they had this theory. Think of the Golden Dawn rose. It has 3 petals in the center, the 3 mother letters of the Hebrew alphabet, 7 middle petals representing the planets, and 12 outer petals representing the zodiac. And it's the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And the theory was, if they could fill that rose with adepts, so at least 12 5 6s, 7 6 5s, and 3 7 4s. If they could accomplish that, the order would survive forever. And they met and surpassed that goal probably 10 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, we have hundreds of 5 6s. And I'm not sure the number of 6. Well, yeah.
I'd say maybe a couple hundred.
Probably a couple hundred. And
it's still a lot more than we've ever had.
Yeah. And I'm not actually sure of the number of 6 5s and 7 4s. I don't think I could say if I did know. But I'm pretty sure there's more than what we need of each of those to fill that rose. So yeah, it's a strong order and growing, and it's impactful. And the system, when people actually follow the system and don't just take it off and go do something weird with it on their own and think they know how to do it all better, and then come back when it crashes and burns and tells everyone how bad the system was, the people who go through the system all the way and do it right, it never fails to be beneficial in some way. I mean, even the ones who crash and burn. I mean, we've seen people come in and take their neophyte and it devastates their whole life. But yet it always does so in a way that when they can't come out the other side, everything's changed for them and they realize they're on a new path, and that the old path was what was harmful to them and destructive to them. And now, from the beginning to the end of the system, it can be very beneficial and very life-altering.
And it's not just the Golden Dawn. I think a lot of other lineages within other traditions, I think we're in a world now where we are so interconnected that, yeah, I do think it can survive.
Oh, yeah.
Even in the face of all of the, TikTok stuff and all of the, just a lot of superficial type of things. You always have the people in the background doing the work. And the vast majority of those people are not out there crowing about it. They're doing the thing.
And that's the thing. It can be easy to get alarmist. You see this TikTok stuff. I understand there are good
TikTok, Instagram.
There are good and dedicated people everywhere, even on TikTok.
Sure.
Like I could sit here and just rail on YouTube occult videos forever, and yet Esoterica with Justin Sledge is there, and there are good channels too. I even have a YouTube channel. So I'm not trying to be all inclusive here, but when you see some of the trends, some of the stuff people are doing where, like I said, no effort, no real study, no awareness of the difference between real magic and what they saw on some Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Dated myself there. But whatever.
Go back even further. Remember the Dungeons and Dragons wizards?
The Dungeons and Dragons wizards and stuff. Yeah. Hey, what level wizard are you? No, that's not how that works.
How this works.
But so it can be very easy to be alarmed by all that because there's so much of it. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think anything's really changed.
See, even back in the day, we had TikTok witches. They were just Dungeon and Dragon.
We really came up in the 90s is where we were the young beginners just getting into things. And it was no different then. And the 80s, the 70s,
the craft,
the 1800s,
all the stuff with the craft.
The grimoires themselves will tell you that a dime a dozen are the fake practitioners, and back then they were usually out to take your money. And, but
nowadays it's kind of the same.
Yeah. And there's still a problem with that today. It hasn't changed. It's easy to be alarmed by what looks like these terrible trends, especially on social media with magic, but I don't think any different. And you're always going to have hordes and hordes of wannabes and hangers-on and LARPers. And then you're going to have within that ring of people is going to be people who are maybe not all that knowledgeable, but they're at least trying to be, and maybe they're not much, they don't know enough to really do the real thing yet, but they're at least trying to get away from the LARPing. And then you go the next ring in, and those are going to be your more serious practitioners and people who actually do study and practice and read the books. And then you're going to go in even further, and you're going to find another ring of people who have completely dedicated their whole lives to it. They don't just do it on the weekends or after work. They literally support themselves by doing it, and they do it 24/7, and they have no social lives, so they can do that. It's always going to be concentric rings of ever more dedicated people. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And I don't think it's any different today.
I would love, Aaron and Carrie, if you could please share with the listeners and check the video and podcast descriptions below, listeners, for a link to Aaron and Carrie's Patreon, to Doc Solomon's, the amazing just website where you can check out very, very high quality crafted items. What else is happening in terms of upcoming classes, projects, writings, anything and everything?
I still have to record it, but I have already written the first of my art classes, and hopefully that will become kind of an ongoing series.
Art classes for making talismans,
magical art,
writing, magical art in general, writing characters, and
but we're just going to start out kind of from the very, very basics, like this is a ruler, this is a compass, this is so on and so forth.
This is a piece of paper.
Right. And because I'd had the idea for a time, and then a friend of mine contacted me, and TikTok popping back up again. She's like, there's these TikToks of people just doing like pretty handwriting, and they're getting like thousands of followers and this, that, and the other. I'm like, and she's like, why aren't you doing that? And so that whole experience kind of renewed my drive to get the art classes done. But yeah, it's going to start out just very simple, hopefully kind of in short segment videos, but knowing us, they'll end up like 2 hours. But
some basic calligraphy,
but anyhow, right,
stuff like that.
After the what's this used for class, I'm probably going to delve into sacred geometry shapes and how to create those, being able to make a geometrically correct triangle, square, pentagram, hexagram, probably on up to dodecagram, being able to do that kind of stuff. And then the next one's probably going to be on how to draw the angelic characters, probably Hebrew, kind of see where it goes. So that's kind of in development.
And of course, I'm finally getting back to work. I've got, in the Abermellon course, I added classes onto the end of it for after you complete the write and how to work with the system. There's 3 of those. It's 2, but it's 1 and then parts A and B of the second one. And I've got to finish the part B of that. And then I'm going to finally put together the 102 or 201. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but the advanced Solomonic class, the one that'll lead off from the 101 class that exists now. I know a lot of people have been waiting for years, but unfortunately most of the people listening probably already know this, but I'm sure there's some listeners that don't. But we've been kind of out of touch for the better part of 3 years. I think we did an interview with you not long after we moved here, and I think that might have been the last interview we were even able to give.
I think I did 1 or 2 since then.
Yeah, there was just no way. We had no internet connection out here that was enough.
Stable enough.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't just interviews. I mean, for me to do research.
Oh gosh, trying to do
put
consults.
Consults, but also doing research for, classes and stuff. You got to find images, and, there's sites like Esoteric Archives that are like absolutely paramount important when I'm writing about the grimoires. So having no access or limited access to all of that, I wasn't able to produce anything. So now that we're back, we can start looking into finally getting those courses and new courses like the art class. And we'd like to get more of the one-off courses like the Ancestors Bovida class that we made. We'd like to get more of those one-off classes done. So the rest of this year and the entirety of next year to be pretty busy on offering new things and upgrading things. And we're pretty excited. It's like after those 3 years of zero internet access, it's like coming up for air again. We got to kind of get our bearings about us, get over the writer's block and stuff. Once we're kind of back in the swing of things, it's going to be awesome.
And we hopefully have some new products coming this year. I'm working on making some molds, making the Solomonic candles easier to make. And one of the things I really hope to get done this year is the sigillum.
They will start offering the
9-inch and the 5-inch.
The Enochian seal of the true God. Actually, we want to expand into a lot of different seals and wax figures and stuff. So stay tuned for that.
Aaron and Carrie Leitch, who are, among many other things, magicians, teachers, artists, and the quintessential Solomonic power couple. I think we can absolutely say that. Thank you so much for sharing your time and also your wisdom.
Always thank you for asking us here, because we could just sit here and talk for hours and hours. And we do, but we could talk for hours and hours more.
It's always awesome talking to you. It really is. And we have so much fun.
Listeners and Glitch Bottle patrons, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Aaron and Carrie as much as I did. I always love how they share their experience, their expertise, but also how they both work together and also independently in order to walk the esoteric paths. It's also so refreshing because the direct experience and feedback from spirits and engagement is one of the main goals of not only the Solomonic and grimoire tradition, but of esotericism of many, many other traditions, because engagement and feedback is one of the most important ways that we grow. Definitely check out the links in the podcast and video description to best support Aaron and Carrie. And also a huge, huge thanks again to each and every Glitch Bottle supporter and member on patreon.com/glitchbottle. Glitch Bottle can say no to advertisers and sponsors and literally only relies on you, on listener support. So check out that link below as well if you'd like to support the podcast. As always, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.